specifically Michael Dust, who was in charge of a kind of innovative program at the time called EvoVal. I've known Michael for years, and I said, well, Michael, you know, maybe this could be something that plays into the museum's desire to communicate to the public in some way, and that would be also specific to the collection. So in this case, working with these kind of snapshots that I made in the park, I chose a piece in the museum, in this case, Poussin's Death of Germanicus, kind of very classic painting, and used Photoshop color sampling to identify the primary colors from within the painting itself, and then match them in some way to the boards of the bench. Very simplistic. Whether or not it really creates a connection is yet to be determined in a lot of ways. You guys are as much of a judge of that as anyone. But these were the ideas that I passed forward. And working with the Liechtenstein there, playing a little bit with the actual palette of the park. This is the early days. I got a lot better at color matching. An Eagleston photograph, and simply, you know, selecting the bench, the board, and filling it with the color in the kind of architectural sketch way. A Walker Evans photograph, a Goya, and then kind of variety here. Henry Wilder, kind of a Native American piece from the Native American collection, which is one of the outstanding collections there, and a few other paintings. A piece from a Mughal painting, and then a Sicilian, kind of like Sicilian religious figure that's in their medieval collection. So I passed these forward, and after a fair amount of negotiation and kind of figuring things out, as well as working with the park board to make this happen, because this space doesn't belong to the museum, it belongs to the park system. And so there's kind of a political negotiation that goes on there. And these are two institutions that, for whatever reason, haven't been that friendly with each other. That was an interest of mine at the time too. Like, how does this happen? How does a great museum in Minneapolis not communicate with the park board? I mean, they're right next to each other. There are some kind of aspects of their long-standing relations which I was unaware of, but they didn't prove to be a barrier in this case. The park system, as it turns out, has wanted to make this park into something totally different for a long time, but they faced community resistance of their own. But I was able to kind of get agreement from the park system. They were excited. The museum said, okay, we'll get behind it. We'll support the project through purchasing the paint and supplying you with an assistant, and you can pursue the project. Here's another one of the sketches, another piece from a Native American suitcase that's in the collection. And one of the classics, Van Gogh. This is a map of the park, with the location of each bench in the park. And as you can see, there is just there's a lot of places to sit down in this park. This is what I worked on. I chose each one of these and created this map, and then designated a relationship between the map and all of these translations from the pieces in the collection. We'll get a chance to see some of these in closer detail in a moment. But basically, I went through the museum and tried to assess what piece of work might translate well into some kind of bench. But also, I did that by making photographs. And as some of you know, I do teach photography here at the university. I'm an artist who works with cameras constantly and thinks about photographic technology, both in terms of capture, but also in terms of post-production and projection in cinema. So I was really using these tools of photography in this case to realize what ultimately is a sculptural and public project, and a very conceptually driven one. So you can see here the more refined version. This is getting up to the point where we've had the green light, and I'm actually producing the template. I would do this, in this case, it's a Vasari portrait of 6 Tuscan poets, so we've got kind of one of the very leading figures of the Italian Renaissance in play. And we're able to kind of just sample. You can kind of tell from the top all the way through. And again, I mean, this is an imprecise science, and I wouldn't say that, I would say that any of us might have a slightly different outcome from this process, but at the same time, over the course of the project, I think there's relative consistency. So we're taking, basically, in a way, we're shrinking the collection, we're stylizing and taking our own read and kind of, in a curatorial sense, remixing. And this has been going on within the museum itself, artists coming into the museum space and working with the existing collections for quite a while now. And I thought this would be a slightly different way to abstract that collection and have it play outside. So this is one of the African masks from the African collection. Magritte, the promenade Euclid. A large Tibetan mandala, which in a kind of apocryphal way, the museum actually has frozen in time. They're not supposed to be permanent, but the museum invited a group of Tibetan monks about 20 years ago to come to the museum, and the piece is actually 12 by 12. So I was really trying to explore that encyclopedic aspect of the Minneapolis Institute of Art's collection, but also do so in a way that would be welcoming to not just connoisseurs of the European tradition, but all those who may and do use the park as it is. Some pieces seem ready-made to be converted into benches in a lot of senses, and some seem more a stretch. So, along with the paint from the museum, the park board supplied my team. I had the tremendous pleasure of working with this group. They were from Powderhorn Park and part of the Teamworks program, which is a summer employment program that the park system operates. So they were all paid by the hour. They were based in Powderhorn, and this particular group were all hearing impaired students. This is not something I understood in the beginning, but it was great to work with them, but also in a really interesting challenge to kind of be pursuing a fairly complex project and a fairly exhaustive project without having recourse to standard language practices. I would really have to explain things, but they were great. And we, over the course of the month of July of 2012, we primed and painted all of the 250 plus boards that then we installed in the park system, into the bench system throughout the park. And you can see that these are the WPA standard concrete benches. There are probably some here around Madison. They're kind of classic in design. The boards slot in, locked underneath. And we had the assistance of a park worker named Art Poole, who's in charge. He's the bench master of Minneapolis. He came and worked with us for the installation. But over the course of a month, we were able to pull this off. Now, it was a bit of I think it was pretty puzzling for my team here as to why or what we were doing. But at the end of the day, we all got along very well, despite Ramadan's intrusion in a way. We had a lot of days where working was not necessarily ideal for everybody. And also, just, I mean, for me, on a cultural level, it took me a while. There were certain aspects of working. The majority of the participants were recent Somali immigrants. And so the idea of getting, for instance, getting paint on your clothes or getting paint on your hands was something that, coming from a family in which my father is a production designer and growing up in shops, is second nature to me in a lot of ways, was actually really difficult for them. And I suggest always keeping these things in mind when you're working with young people or anyone really. Everybody has different work styles, but we managed to put it all together. And let's see. So we'll go through now and we'll try to see how well we as a team were able to match up some of both the pieces and locations. So we have a portrait of George Washington in the collection that then ends up translating into this bench in the foreground. There is a statue of George Washington in the park. It's the single piece of kind of park monumental architecture there. A wide shot of how things ended up looking at the end of the day. Got a Philip Guston piece, Prospects. Not too far off. Another kind of wide shot. And what happens for me at least, over the course of this, is the act of documenting and the act of then sharing these as images starts to inform a different kind of feeling than you would have in the park itself, of course. In the fundamental act of photography is to frame things and to organize things in that frame, to exclude some things and to include others. And in this case, I think we can kind of get a little view of the detail. Now, the specific way we were connecting and letting people even know about what this relation was between these new bench colors and the museum's collection was with these little plaques. So this is Grace Hardigan billboard, and then it had the date, it had her name, it had the title of the piece, and then it had a link to the collection website. This project that Michael Dust was doing was actually an initiative funded through MLS to kind of connect people to the museum through a web presence, and this was the kind of little key that we were able to employ to qualify within that. Though my interest was as much, perhaps more so, in just the simple act of walking through the park and suddenly having it be like this, rather than having it be this kind of drab atmosphere. So this is the Grace Hardigan piece in the foreground that was just noted there with the plaque. And that's the actual original. And that's the same kind of view. You can see how it all hopefully kind of fits together to animate a different relationship with the park. This was a self-portrait by a local arts patron, donated to the museum and on view. Of course, the color matching is always affected by the quality of the light in these situations too. Here we have a set of benches that is these were the ones facing that we saw in the very first slide. And so this is a Native American pouch that is matching to, again, the light is a little bit off, but got this pair here, the Death of Germanicus, which we saw earlier with Herbert Hoover's childhood home by Grant Wood, which is right there, and then right there. London, it was the summer of 2012, so I tried to be a little topical and tied in an Andre Durain London piece. Here we have, ironically, the only piece that from the original proposal that ended up in the same location, which is the St. Benedict of Palermo. Pentiment. You can kind of see a little bit more of the activity in the park. To be truthful, it was a little daunting working independently in the park and just with a group of basically kids. There are a lot of different people in the park, and there are some people here who seem to be wanting to truly be left alone, not even to be looked at. But there were never, of course, any problems. My experience in working in public places is one's imagination outstrips any kind of possibility of danger for the most part, as long as you're treating people with respect. We were in the park constantly over this period. Part of the design of the entire project, of course, I was aware of, was that it would change in terms of its meaning and also visual value over the course of Minnesota's long seasonal shifts. I was very much looking forward to this part of the process, in part because I had been really inspired in the back of my mind by having been a guard and having looked out the window at this park. There are several large windows in the museum facing out, and I was doing it in February or March, sometime in the early 90s as a guard. I just was looking for any glimmer of hope during the Minnesota winter. And adding a little color is just a little contribution. This is a Lakota cradle that then kind of plays out here in a new way. Marshall Gorky. And of course, as somebody who's very keen and about photography and thinking about photography, it also doesn't necessarily become a strategy to create photographs per se. I'm not sure